good afternoon. Thank you all for being here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ellina Yin, and I'm going to be moderating today's panel discussion. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over some housekeeping items. And this presentation is going to be recorded. It will also be uploaded on YouTube later. And we ask that you stay muted unless speaking when we take questions. We will be taking questions in the chat. You may use the raise hand feature. And additionally, also housekeeping, the civil grand jury, we're here to cover local government, which is the city, county, and special districts. We don't have anything to do with the federal government, so just wanted to give that disclaimer. And so now I'll hand it off to Brittany.
Thank you so much, Ellina. And so I am pleased to see everyone here today. I just want to take a moment to introduce the court's presiding judge. The Honorable Julie Emede was appointed to the Superior Court bench in December of 2009. And she has previously served in or supervised the Civil Division, Criminal Domestic Violence Calendar, Provisional Remedies and Appellate Division, Probate Court, Family Court, Misdemeanor Court. I'm sorry if I missed something, Your Honor, but she also is a presenter at various judicial and continuing legal education seminars and previously taught at the Santa Clara University School of the Law. As presiding judge, Judge Emede is now responsible for leading our court, including allocating resources and establishing policy. She manages various aspects related to the recruitment and selection of the civil grand jury, all while ensuring the effective administration of justice across all Santa Clara County Superior Court divisions. So thank you, Judge Emede, for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Brittany, for that introduction. And thank you to Ellina for her work with the webinar today. Appreciate it. It is one of the pleasures of being the presiding judge that I am involved with the civil grand jury. And so it's my pleasure to be with you today to talk about the important work that is done in our community by the civil grand jury. I appreciate your interest in this topic, and I hope to provide really just a basic introduction about what service on the civil grand jury would mean. I want to quickly mention that we are not talking about the criminal grand jury. The criminal grand jury has a different selection process and a different purpose. The criminal grand jury is selected from the regular jury pool, like when you receive a jury summons, and their job is to consider whether there is sufficient evidence to indict a person for a crime. The civil grand jury, on the other hand, is an examining and investigative body that makes recommendations to improve systems, procedures, and methods of operations of local government. The primary functions of the civil grand jury and the most important reasons for its existence are examining all aspects of county government, seeing that the public's monies are handled judiciously, and ensuring that all accounts are properly audited. Put simply, the role of the grand jury is to guarantee honest, efficient government in the best interests of the people. As it is set up today, the civil grand jury is part of the judicial branch of government. And although the grand jury is part of the judicial system, and grand jurors are considered to be officers of the court, the grand jury is an entirely independent body. While the court and county counsel and other attorneys, as you will learn today, act as advisors to the civil grand jury, we cannot direct or prevent the actions of the civil grand jury so long as the civil grand jury operates within the law. Having said that, the court does play an important role with the grand jury. And while the court has many grand jury related responsibilities, I'm only going to talk about 4 of those today. So first, and part of what we're talking about today, the court must assemble the grand jury by undertaking a recruitment and selection process for potential grand jurors. California law determines who's eligible to serve on the civil grand jury, which you're going to hear more about. After the initial selection process, the court then selects grand jurors by draw from the pool of qualifying applicants. Citizens serve on the civil grand jury for 1 full year. Second, after selection of the grand jury, the court must then impanel the selected grand jury and formally charge them with their duties. And then third, the court will consult with and advise the grand jury upon request of the grand jury. And then lastly, the court will receive the civil grand jury's final reports and review them for compliance with the law to be sure that those reports do not extend beyond the legal boundaries of the civil grand jury's power. The sole function of that review is to prevent official filing of an illegal report. Having talked about the court's responsibilities, I want to talk now about three aspects of serving on the civil grand jury that I want to highlight for all of you that are here today. Those three things are confidentiality, avoiding conflicts and bias, and the commitment obligation. So first, let me talk about confidentiality. Because of the nature of the grand jury's work, much of it must be conducted in closed session. Grand jurors are sworn to secrecy, thus assuring that those who appear before the grand jury know that their complaints will be handled in an entirely confidential manner. To ensure that confidentiality, no one, including me, may be present during the sessions of a grand jury except those who are permitted by law. The minutes of the grand jury's meetings may not be inspected by anyone, and the civil grand jury's records may not be subpoenaed. After confidentiality, I want to talk about avoiding conflicts and bias. Because of the grand jury's extraordinary fact-finding powers and the sensitivity of many of its activities, grand jurors must be very careful to avoid involvement in areas where an actual or perceived conflict of interest might exist. Avoiding conflicts and the appearance of conflicts protects the integrity of an investigation, protects the grand jury as an institution, and protects individuals from civil or criminal penalties. So in addition to avoiding conflicts of interest, a grand juror must not have an identifiable bias regarding any actions the grand jury may take. Bias is any prejudgment of essential facts that prevents a grand juror from considering an issue objectively. No member of the grand jury may use or appear to use their position for any kind of personal gain or advantage. In fact, members must not identify themselves as grand jurors in matters other than those directly connected with grand jury business. The third item I wanted to talk about is time commitment. I am always impressed with the folks that apply to participate on and serve on the civil grand jury. You're going to hear from some of our very hardworking jurors shortly. They make a commitment to being available to serve 20 to 25 hours per week and sometimes more for a year. While there's a per diem reimbursement and some costs are covered, it is at its heart volunteer work on behalf of the community. The grand jurors you will hear from today will also tell you why they do it, because while it's a significant commitment of time and energy, it is also very rewarding. Now, that's just a very simple overview of a very complicated subject. I thank you so much for your attention and the attention that you will give to the other folks that are here today. They'll provide more detail and they'll be able to address your more specific questions. Most importantly, I look forward to meeting those of you who decide to apply to be on the civil grand jury. Now, before I turn it back over to Britney, I do want to thank our current civil grand jury members and past grand jury members who are here today to share their insights, both for being here and for their important and very diligent service on behalf of the community on the civil grand jury. I also want to thank Britney for her tireless work on behalf of the civil grand jury. As you will see and hear, she has a great depth of knowledge about and commitment to the civil grand jury's work. So unfortunately, I'm not able to stay with you for the remainder of the webinar as I have another commitment today at lunchtime, but I know that you are in very good hands. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Britney and Ellina. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Honor. We appreciate those remarks and the information you've shared about this grand jury, as well as your guidance.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thanks. And so we have prepared a very brief PowerPoint for today's session that I will go through before the panel discussion. So I'm going to share my screen now. I promise this will be short and painless. If you do have questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. We will answer those as we're able to. So first, we did just want to briefly thank our partners for today's presentation, including the Dreaming Collaborative, care of our wonderful Ellina, who serves as our moderator, LEAD Filipino, and CreaTV. The agenda today, we can see here, we've heard from the wonderful presiding judge Emede. I'm going to briefly go through our slides and then we'll dive right in with Eric, Allison, and Dinesh as moderated by Ellina. So the Santa Clara County Civil Grand Jury, as we heard, it is an independent body that is not to be confused with jury duty. So this is voluntary service, a 19-member body that does serve for 1 year. It does operate on a voting system, and so all 19 members have an equal vote. The grand jury does function lawfully only as a body, and the majority of the panel must agree on all final findings and recommendations. The responsibilities and authority of the civil grand jury are specified in the California Constitution, the Penal Code, the Government Code, case law, the Attorney General opinions, and then are interpreted by each county. So every county in California has a grand jury system. We are here today to talk about Santa Clara County. Things may work a bit differently in other counties, but the underpinning is the same. So as Judge Emede said, it's based in confidentiality, it's rooted in law, and it focuses primarily on this watchdog role of present-day grand jurors. So in this role, the grand jury does examine aspects of county and city government and special districts to ensure the best interest of Santa Clara County residents are being served. They do investigate resident complaints. These are all kept confidential, and in the course of those investigations that may come from a complaint, they'll evaluate procedures, methods, and systems, and will also be required to inspect county detention facilities. So what does the grand jury investigate? By law, at a very least, they are required to investigate and report out on county government. We have a chart here where it breaks down kind of our main governmental entities. I know Ellina provided us with that wonderful reminder about federal and state government not being within the jurisdiction of the civil grand jury. There also is a focus on ensuring that we're looking at the civil grand jury is looking at systems and that the government is operating effectively. It is not the function of a civil grand jury to interfere with discretionary policy-making powers of our local officials. So how does the grand jury do this? During its term, the grand jury is heavily involved with the agencies and local governments that they're investigating. All investigations are subject to, again, majority approval of the panel, and those votes occur without any outside influence. So the judge, myself, legal counsel, no outside entities have their finger on the scale of the civil grand jury votes. Through this process, the grand jury does perform inspections and site visits, interviews with individuals, and a ton of document review. So grand jurors can simply elect to review the operations of an agency or an agency of local government unrelated to any particular complaint, so long as the goal is to promote accountability and improve efficiency and effectiveness. The grand jury does also have broad subpoena power, and so they have discretion on how to approach investigations and can enlist confidential support from its legal advisors. As Judge Emede mentioned, that is primarily the office of the county counsel here in Santa Clara County. Looking at the impact of those investigations, a wide range of agencies have been investigated in the past. So we have some examples up here about media coverage and the response from our community. This is just a small sample size of the reports and investigations completed by the civil grand juries in our county. Each agency or entity investigated does have to file a formal response by law, and it does outline the entity's response to the recommendations made by the grand jury. Those are available on our website. There has also been statewide recognition, both from nonprofit bodies, but also from state elected officials citing grand jury reports in their press releases. So we saw one specific about public transit just about a year ago, grand jury report from 2019 was referenced by a state elected official. So these do have a considerable effect beyond the county lines. And then on the other hand, some reports receive less media attention, but have significant local impact. And so it's great for the grand jury to also have these continuity or compliance reports where they're looking at what local agencies or entities have done in response to grand jury reports. Switching gears a little bit, the Santa Clara County, as I mentioned, there are 19 volunteers. They must apply for service, and by law, the Superior Court does select the grand jury under the guidance of the presiding judge. The civil grand jury does commit to serving for one fiscal year in our county, and we do say it's about 20 to 25 hours per week. Although, of course, we understand, appreciate, and celebrate that grand jurors have personal commitments, vacation time. There may be other things that they need to do. And so flexibility and discretion are built into how grand jury work is scheduled. Hybrid work, remote work continues to be available in our county and is a big part of how the grand jury in 2026 does its work. Again, there are some legal qualifications to serving on the grand jury. Those will be on the next slide. But I really want to stress that the beauty of the grand jury is that it brings together folks from all different backgrounds, educational, professional, all different areas of our county. And so a question I get a lot is, what type of degree do I need? What type of work experience? And I'm here to share that all backgrounds are sought. We need perspectives from all walks of life in our community because the civil grand jury really should represent the community it serves, which is all of Santa Clara County. The one thing that is highly desired is a willingness to collaborate because it is a collaborative body, and to be heavily involved in these investigations and report writing. So like I mentioned, there are some legal qualifications. I'm not going to read these to you. They are in the application. So if you are interested in serving, you'll be asked to certify that you meet all of these requirements. And I saw a question in the chat about a Form 700 that is a statement of economic interest that is required by law for members of the civil grand jury. And I'm happy to chat about that offline because it is a fairly complex subject, but it is something that is required of members of the civil grand jury to file. And then, speaking of things being complex and me being happy to chat, another question we get a lot is, what kind of support or infrastructure is there to help the grand jury do its work? So I'm here to say you are not alone. The civil grand jury does have fabulous legal support from the Office of the County Counsel. There can also be assistance from the District Attorney's Office if needed for quasi-criminal or conflict matters. I do assist the grand jury in its work, and grand jurors are entitled to $45 in per diem, to mileage reimbursement, parking. We provide supplies, including software. So I mentioned remote meetings. The court will provide email addresses and Teams accounts and all of those Microsoft tools to facilitate the grand jury's work. There is also extensive training. So, you get training from the legal advisors, from tech support on writing, what it means to be on the grand jury, and of course, navigating investigations. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to the wonderful Miss Ellina for the panel discussion.
Mute. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you so much for that wonderful, informative crash course on who, where, when to apply. And now I'm going to introduce the panel. And we have 3 guests with us right now, past and current. And I'm just going to pin them really quick so that we can all see. And I would love for each of the panelists to introduce your name, what year you served, and then we're going to start getting into the questions. And so I will popcorn it off to Allison.
Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. So hi, my name is Allison. It's been a while. I think the year that I served was 2020, 2021. Correct me if I'm wrong, but me and Eric were on we served during the same year. And I'm from San Jose, California.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, like Allison said, 2020 to 2021, it was kind of the tail end of the COVID pandemic, so it was an interesting time for sure. But yeah, also from San Jose.
Great. And Dinesh?
Thanks, Lena. Hi, my name is Dinesh. I'm actually a member of the current grand jury. I am 8 months into our 12-month term, and I live in Santa Clara.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for your service. And I'm going to round robin it. And so before your service, did you know what the civil grand jury was? Where did you learn about it? And what made you want to apply? And so I'll start again with Allison.
Yeah. So if I remember correctly, I think I was looking for a job because I had just finished school, university, and I knew that I kind of wanted to go into the government sector. So I'm looking around, seeing if there was anything that I could do in the county. And I think from what I remember, there were no jobs available at the court at that time. But I was like, oh, there's this. This is interesting. And it was also COVID. So I mean, it's not like, we were at a time when people kind of were stuck and didn't really know what to do. So that's probably why I couldn't find a job. Um, so I said I could try this, see how it goes. It's only for a year. So that's kind of, oh, the other question was, did I know what it was? No. But that's why I just remember reading everything into the website, and I think I also did a little bit of like a Google search to understand like what it actually does, differentiating between like criminal and civil, to see if it was something that I could commit to for a year because a year is a long time. Um, but yeah, I think I was much more flexible at the time because I was really, really young still and didn't have a idea yet of where I wanted my career to go.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I can imagine being a recent graduate and having this opportunity. I would have loved that. And back in 2020, I did not know what the civil grand jury was. If I did, I would have also applied. Eric?
Yeah, so I think to answer your question of how I heard about it, I want to say that my mom sent me a link from like Nextdoor or something, and was like, "You should do this. You should think about this." And I looked into it, and it seemed exactly what I was looking for. I mean, it was, it was COVID, right? So I had been working retail before that, been furloughed, then laid off, and so I was going a bit stir crazy at the time. But also, during the COVID pandemic was also the time of like the Black Lives Matter protests and a lot of, racial justice protests and, seeing the country kind of be where it was, I really felt I needed to step up and do something. And so this was a way to, act locally and really get involved. And so it kind of was a confluence of things, right? I needed something to do. This seemed to line up for it. And yeah, it was the exact right thing I needed. It kind of set me off on a completely different path in my life. It's like a kind of midlife crisis in my mid 30s. So it was a nice kind of reset of things. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Eric. Dinesh?
So I came into it, I guess, a little later in my life. So before I came to the grand jury, one of my jobs was I was a news reporter in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I used to report on criminal grand jury activities. So when I came back home to the Bay Area, I had heard of civil grand juries, but I really I knew it was different from a criminal grand jury, but I didn't really know what the difference was. But I always had it in the back of my mind that, I would see it in San Jose Mercury news stories about the grand jury as it was investigating the sheriff's office or the 49ers, things like that. So I always had a sense that there was something cool out there called the civil grand jury. I didn't really know what it was. I didn't know how to get involved. and then I would see the ads in the San Jose Mercury, and the timing just sort of worked out. I looked into it while I still had a job, and I was thinking, maybe I could do it part-time if it's only 20, 25 hours. Um, as I looked into it, it seemed like that was going to be unrealistic. And in hindsight, actually serving on the grand jury right now, I could say I don't think there's any way I would have been able to hold down a job and do this at the same time. Um, that's just my personal experience, though. But yeah, I feel like I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I I wasn't really sure what it was when I started, but it's turned out to be a fantastic experience.
Great, thank you for that. Allison, and so we're going to go in the same order. And this next question is, in terms of your background, maybe what you studied in school and serving on the grand jury, how did that help you prepare for the grand jury? Or how did the service in the grand jury kind of impact where you wanted to go?
Okay, so I guess a little bit of a background on me. So at the time, I think it was like 2016 or something. For university, I was actually planning to go into like applied medical sciences. And at the time, I remember I was actually supposed to go to school in University College London, in the UK. And at the time, I remember there's all this talk about Brexit the entire time I was there. So I ended up studying history, politics, and economics. And as Eric said, mentioning all those other events that were happening around that time, I think it very much was like something that I wanted to do is to help out in the local community. So I didn't have much of a background in terms of like career like Dinesh had. Um, but that was more of my background. And I knew that I wanted to do something like I wasn't sure if I wanted to do something in the legal sector yet, but I feel like this touched upon it, but not too much where it was, just a law or anything like that. It was more about investigations and it touched a little bit on the legal aspects of it.
Eric?
Yeah. So, I mean, my background, I went to undergrad for theater and then got my master's in theater, did that for a bit, then worked retail for about a decade with a plan of becoming a teacher. We talked about the pandemic and how that I think it also kind of showed me I didn't want to be a teacher because it seemed just not a great time for that. So I kind of came in, I don't know, I just felt like it's an average citizen on some level in the grand jury. But I can say that it really, and a lot of the people in the grand jury, and everybody was very intelligent. They were like intellectually curious. They were civic minded. These were all like values that, I held. And I realized a lot of people among my the other grand jurors were like former attorneys. And so I started looking at law school, which for some reason had never occurred to me in like my 30 something years on this earth. And yeah, now I'm about to graduate from law school about another 2 months. I'm gonna work for a federal judge after that, and then go back to California, work at a firm there. So I mean, like, it really changed my life. I mean, it really gave me a different perspective on things. It also really showed me like how much power we have as like citizens and the things we can do, and if we listen and get engaged and take action. So these are all the kinds of things that I really wanted, and I really feel like I got out of the grand jury.
Thank you. What an inspiring story. I love that. And congratulations on your soon to be graduation. Dinesh?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? Are you asking how this prepared for future?
Yes. If your background and your previous job helped prepare for this, and how has your experience been serving?
Got it. Actually, I think so. My personal experience, I think, was definitely beneficial from the perspective of having a lot of experience with writing and investigating and going through documents. One thing I will say though is on our current grand jury, we have 19 people, and there is a broad diversity of backgrounds. And I can say this affirmatively, no matter what a person's background is, every single person has been adding value. We have some people who have law backgrounds, some people who have backgrounds in city management, data management, data, IT people. We have some people who don't have a whole lot of experience in any of that stuff, but they've just lived in Santa Clara County for 20 years, and they know the issues, they know what things were like 20 years ago and compared to now. So while I am glad that I had a background that prepared me, I will say that I can't think of any background that someone might have where the grand jury would not be able to put them to use. There is such a broad diversity of what we do, of a breadth of responsibilities that are involved in the tasks that we undertake. So I would pretty much, I think I could pretty safely say that no matter what your background is, there will be a way that the grand jury could put you to good use.
Thank you so much for that, Dinesh. And that goes into our next question. And you are currently serving. So could you tell us a little bit about, what a day in the life of a grand juror looks like?
Sure. So I would say that in my experience so far, it seems like there's kind of three distinct parts to a grand jury term. The first part, the first 3 or 4 months is sort of the pre-investigatory phase where we're trying to decide which complaints we're going to be acting upon and which investigations we'll be doing. The second part is actually doing the research and the document requests and the interviews and reading reports and that sort of thing. And now we're sort of in the final stage, which is now that we have all that information, now we put it together into reports. So a day in the life is going to be a little bit different depending on where we are in those. But for the most part, we break up into committees, and each committee sort of determines its own path forward. So there's a division of labor. You decide what you want to work on and how you want to approach it. People sign up for certain roles depending on their expertise or what sort of experience they want to get out of the grand jury. And then the committees will meet, and then we, as a full 19-person body, will meet once a week. And then as a group, we kind of make some group decisions, and we make sure that everyone's sort of on the same path. There will be a little bit of reviewing new complaints as they come in. There's providing assistance for your fellow committee members. There's some independent work that you're doing at home remotely. There's some committees that prefer to meet in person, so they'll get together and spend a couple of hours doing some work together. So I don't mean to overgeneralize. There really isn't a very specific single day in the life type thing. But like I said, it sort of depends on where you are in your year.
Thank you. It sounds like there's also a lot of room to design what that day looks like with there being 19 members in various committees. So this next question is for Eric. And if you can take us back, and what was it like receiving a complaint? What was that process like of determining, are we going to take up this complaint, or maybe we're going to pass it on? What was your process that you remember?
I mean, so we would all, read the complaint individually, and we would all, think about it, do a little bit of research if we felt it was warranted, and then, we'd bring it to I was a member of the complaints committee, and so we would, discuss: is there something here? Is this a problem that is appropriate for the grand jury? Some people had personal grievances, right, that weren't necessarily indicative of anything larger, and there wasn't really anything we can do, but we made sure to give each of them like the appropriate amount of time and to actually discuss them, just to make sure there wasn't something key we were missing, like this was endemic of like a larger problem, so or emblematic of a larger problem. So yeah, and then from there we would decide: are we going to bring this to the full committee, to the full grand jury? Are we going to Is something we want to investigate? And we definitely did, like, had some of our reports that year were generated from complaints received by the civil grand jury, which was, I think, really just showed like how important the whole process is. Other complaints, other reports we filed and investigations we did were, issues brought up by grand jury members themselves, but we definitely had some we never would have investigated had someone not brought it to our attention.
Thank you. And Allison, when you were serving, how was it organizing the work? And, how did you determine like the committees and who was on the committees? Can you walk us through that process?
Yeah, so from what I remember, one of the first things we did off the bat was we wanted to organize ourselves. That's kind of something that they stressed. And I think we had about 3 or 4 different committees. You can honestly pick any, like have each committee focus on anything that you want. So I remember one was like health and human services or something like that. And that could encompass a wide range of things, right? And so basically the way it would work is that you would just join each committee as you please. There's no strict number of people who have to be on it. If two people wanted to be on it, which I don't think we did, you could. It's just really a matter of everyone's interest at the time and what they want to focus on. Like sometimes they already had knowledge of things of what they wanted to look for. Like maybe it's, everyone knows about the housing issue here because it's so expensive. Um, so people would kind of like gravitate towards that. And whoever wanted to join at some point, it's also fine. I don't think we also had a definitive cutoff time as to when you can join. Like maybe, let's say you're hearing something from a committee, I don't know, a few weeks later, and you're like, oh, this sounds like interesting, and they're working on something that I'm look I want to know more about and that I want to get involved in, then you can jump in right away. Um, was there anything else that I missed?
No, I think
I don't
that's
think so.
great, and thank you
Yeah.
for clarifying that you can jump in anytime, so you're not locked into a committee for like
Hmm.
the whole entire year duration. So that's really awesome to hear about the flexibility. So this is back to round robin, and we're going to go in reverse order and start with Dinesh. And so, what would you say from your perspective is one of the key considerations that people should think about if they want to apply and be successful at this?
So I'll answer this question from the perspective of 1 year ago, I was sitting exactly where you all are right now. And so I imagine that a lot of you have similar questions to what I had at that moment. And I can tell you that even though I felt pretty good about my reporter background and feeling like, I'm sure I could add some value, I was nervous about what I didn't know. I was thinking, are these civil grand juries just going to be going through all sorts of like long documents with legalese that I'm not going to really understand? Is there certain context that people who have kids or have gone through certain school districts are going to understand, depending on what an investigation involves? And I was wondering if the limited qualifications I had were going to be good enough. Um, and I will say that I think the point that Brittany made before when she was talking about the resources that we have available to us, between Brittany and our council and the trainings that we get, there it is very we are very conveniently put in a position to succeed. So we have the tools available to us. We have the diversity of our fellow members, and I think I missed, what was the final part of your question?
No, I think you got everything. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Eric?
Yeah, I'd say, one thing is just understanding. I think Dinesh had really talked about this, understanding that this is like a time commitment and this is, something that's going to take up a decent amount of time. So just being prepared for that. It's not something that like, you have to schedule your life around this and everything like that. There definitely is, you get to choose when the committees meet. You get to choose, you can set meeting times and all that kind of stuff. But I think just being prepared but also being prepared for like the rewards that come from this. I mean, I think a lot of people who are on this call are on this call because they want to get involved in the community. They want to serve their community. And so I think just be prepared for everything, the good and the bad, and I guess not bad, the good and the limiting, I guess, on some level. But no, it was a great experience.
Thank you, Allison.
Yeah. So in terms of time commitment, okay, so I remember when I started, I wasn't doing anything, but I remember I think towards the middle end of that year, I started going to school full time. I started doing paralegal studies at Dianza. And of course, it was COVID, so everything was online. So it was a lot easier for me to jump in onto all these meetings. I would say the time commitment would also depend on how much you give into the grand jury. So for me, I was in like multiple committees. Do I remember all of them? No, but I just remember doing a bunch of stuff on top of school. And so if you're just a person who's gonna be like, okay, I'm just gonna join this one committee because I have other obligations, um, okay, you can put in an hour for that, just 1 hour for the extra committee. However, what I do want to say too is that I remember we did have some grand jurors who, because of that time commitment, like they would not like be in attendance, I guess, for our committee meetings. So if you miss like 2 weeks here and there, and we're trying to move this along, like it's not going to help you either, especially when if you're in a committee and it's a bit smaller and you guys have to divide up the work. Um, so it really, I would say it just depends on how much you want to put into it and what you want to look into. Because I also remember at that time, we had to go to the courthouse at some point, and I know that that was more of a big time commitment for most of the people in our group. But really, it just depends what you want to look for or what you want to investigate and how much effort you're willing to put into it itself. It's not as bad as it sounds, believe me, because I remember I was also working part-time at some point, and so that's why I had to stop doing it on my second term, I think. But yeah, that's my comment on that.
Thank you for that. And thanks for clarifying that, it's okay to also miss a few meetings because life still happens within that year. And so I'm going to wrap up these last questions together so that we have a little bit more time for questions from the audience and also to go over a little bit more about our sponsors and other places that they can volunteer if they don't have enough time to do the civil grand jury. So this question is, in your own words, what would your inspiring mission statement be to people who are contemplating applying that describes what the civil grand jury is and why you enjoyed it? So describing your inspirational mission statement to people to encourage them to apply. And what would you let's see. Yes. What would you say to a person, maybe from your own perspective, like a college student, and why they should apply? And so we'll start with Dinesh.
Okay. So I have two thoughts. So first of all, I'm glad that you have the perspective of some folks who did this earlier in their careers. I can tell you from the current makeup, most of us are retirees. And I think that's one reason we wanted to do this. Like I said, we've lived in the Bay Area for some people for 30, 40, 50 years, and all sort of felt like, we have a little bit more time on our hands, and now is a good time to give back to the community. And this is a fantastic way to do it, a fantastic opportunity to really make a difference. The investigations that we're looking at are not necessarily punitive. We're not looking to throw anyone under the bus. We're looking to help our agencies do a better job of serving their communities. We're looking to make sure that people who are members of our communities, maybe underserved parts of our communities who feel like they're not getting justice or they're not getting a fair shake, that they have us that they can come to, and we can look into things and make sure that justice is being served, making sure that our community members are all being treated with the fairness and respect that they deserve. And I can tell you one other thing that's sort of keeping us going at this point is, as our reports start coming out, we know that a few days after, news releases go out when our reports go out. So a few days after that, for at least some of our reports, I wouldn't be surprised if you see a front page story in the San Jose Mercury News saying, here's something that the grand jury just discussed. And for us to be able to open up the paper and say, hey, our community is talking about this because of the work that we spent months and months doing. Our community is talking about it. Our agencies are reviewing our report, and they're hopefully making things better. Our newspaper stations, our TV stations are drawing attention to this. People are discussing it, and hopefully a year or two or three from now, we'll look back at those agencies and say that they moved forward as a result of the work that we did. So when I talk about making our communities better, that's exactly what I mean. I mean the feeling that even if we're doing this, we're not getting paid a lot of money, we're not getting a lot of fame, we're not, but it's just our communities have given us so much. And gosh, what a fantastic way to spend 20, 25 hours a week just knowing that what we're doing is benefiting. There are a million people in Santa Clara County. What 19 people are doing is really, truly, genuinely having an impact on a million lives. And that's a fantastic feeling.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really excited to read the reports this year. And thank you so much for your service. And Eric?
Yeah, I mean, the way I always describe it to people, because I describe it in a lot of job interviews and all this kind of stuff, because they're like, what is this thing? What is this civil grand jury? When I really talk about it's us being able to hold agents and agencies in the county accountable, because I think so often as individual citizens, we feel relatively powerless in the face of government. Like, we can organize, we can volunteer, but on some level, sometimes at least it got to me, right? But I think what's so great about the civil grand jury is that you're empowered to investigate, issues that either that you hold dear to yourself or that you hear, people in the community raising. And so being able to be empowered to speak directly to these people who are in charge, who can and should, following the recommendations of the civil grand jury, make changes in their agencies and organizations. I know there's something just really special about that. Like you get to talk to these people who are in a position of power, in a position to make changes, and therefore you're in a position of power, in a position to make changes or to enable changes in your community. And I think, Dinesh was really talking about, like, it really is a great way to serve your community. I grew up in San Jose. I went on the East Coast about 10 years for undergrad and grad school, but I came back and I'm gonna head back to the Bay Area again soon, just because I love it. And I think we all want to make this place that we love, that we've grown up in or that we've adopted, somewhere that's better for, our neighbors and in our community.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Allison?
Yeah, so for me, I would say if you really want to make an impact at the local level, then I think you should join it. You may not get the whole shebang all the time and be acknowledged like individually, but the reports kind of speak for themselves. And as Bertie pointed out earlier, there's been recognition at the state level as well. Um, for folks who are younger, I saw that there was a comment on there asking if we tend to skew younger. Fun fact, I was actually the youngest person in my cohort. I think I was about 22, and there was very few of us who were in our like 20s and 30s. It was mostly definitely retirees. Was it difficult? Yes, it was difficult because I think for me, it was my first time kind of being in an almost working environment with people who had much more experience, much more knowledge than me. So I'm always happy to hear like younger folks being interested in it. I don't think just because people tend to skew older, that should scare you off. So definitely join if you're kind of on the fence. Um, in terms of how it's also impacted me, like I think for me, so I felt like joining the grand jury, I made some sort of local impact with all the reports that we made, and then having also that recognition at the time at the state level. Um, it also kind of spoke for itself. I guess I've also kind of continued working or serving for the people in a way because I now work for the federal government as well. I've been here for 3 years now, and I think without that grand jury service, I would not be where I am today because I feel like it kind of solidified not only just my career path, but I made a lot of contacts with people. Like I remember one of the people, the grand jurors I was working with, they're like, "Oh, my daughter works at this watchdog agency in Santa Clara County. Why don't you look into it?" So it was also a lot of networking into other agencies, almost like an introduction into Santa Clara County itself and what you want to do after if you're interested in that. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you. I'm so glad to have your perspective, to have everyone's perspective here. I've heard some grand jurors describe the process as getting like a master's in public administration and understanding your local government more. And it's really inspiring to hear the different stories. And it's also why, the Dreaming Cloud, have partnered with the court to produce the podcast where we go into a deep dive. There's like 5 episodes that dive really deep into this process. That's free wherever you get your podcast. Is only in Santa Clara County. And before we, I think we're ready to take some questions, Brittany. So if you want to raise your hand or if you want to pop it in the chat, the panelists can answer, I can answer, or Brittany can answer. And then we'll save the last 5 minutes. So this ends at 1:15. And so we'll just save like the last 3 minutes to just go over other volunteer opportunities. Brittany, if you can help me with the questions, that would be great.
Absolutely, Ellina. I'm not seeing any hands right now, but there was one in the chat. Unless you'd like to take Mr. Grace first. Let's go ahead. I'll go ahead and unmute you, Mr. Grace, if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at um, the Superior Court's website where it lists all the available grand jury reports, and I was wondering if any of the grand jurors could give us a feel on because these reports are covering all kinds of topics. So, how does the grand jury determine what they're going to work on when they're impaneled? How do you guys hear from? I'm looking here. There must have been an issue at one time in 2022 with conservatorships. There was a report like 10 years ago on mail-in ballots. How do those things come to your attention? And also, maybe that's too much, but like, I'm also wondering, like, what happens when maybe this never happens, but maybe you're coming to the end of your term and your investigation's not done. Do you just wash your hands of it? Does an incoming grand juror say, hey, look what these guys didn't get done?
Thank you, Mr. Grace. Does anybody want to take Dinesh? Go ahead.
Okay, well, a couple of things. So in terms of how we decide, there's a public forum on the grand jury website where people who want to file a complaint can go ahead and do that. So a lot of what we do is reviewing the complaints that come in, and people can suggest or either raise a concern that they want us to look into. Those are all valid options for if someone comes up with an idea, whether it comes from an external complaint or an internal member, or something that you personally are interested in. Someone mentioned before something about, homelessness being an issue here. It could be something, if that's something you personally care about, you could submit a complaint about that, present it to the body and have a discussion about that. And that's an equally valid way of having the investigation start.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Brittany, but I think also like there are holdover documents, so the next grand jury isn't starting from scratch. So, sometimes there are complaints that, we recognize as being like, oh, these are significant, we just don't have the time. Sometimes because you receive them, later in your term and you just don't have the ability to give it its, full attention, the attention it requires. And they're also, so we do handover stuff. We don't just drop things off. There are oftentimes holdover grand jurors as well, grand jurors who serve more than one term to kind of, I think, help the continuity from year to year and to make sure that, the institutional knowledge we've gained isn't just thrown to the wind.
Thank you. We have, I think, one last question. Feel free to pop into the chat as well, and Brittany will share the email. So if there's more questions that we don't get to, please feel free to ask. And so, Miss Brown, if you want to ask your question, there you go. You can unmute yourself now.
Okay, great. Thank you so very much. Do panel presentations directly address any of the issues that we are investigating?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that question. Do you mind repeating that?
Sure. Are the panel presenters comprised of any sort of background expertise that we are using when we're doing our investigations?
I can hop in unless there's a member of the panel who'd like to. I saw Dinesh unmute, so.
Oh, actually, if you want to start,
Sure, absolutely. So if I understand correctly, the question is about if the panelists themselves, if their background affects how a grand jury will vote. And so the grand jury does rely on the background knowledge and expertise of each member to inform its decisions. The grand jury is a deliberative body, and so every member has to be given the time, space, the forum to voice their opinion to their colleagues. So the grand jury will have a complaint or an investigation, or maybe it's a site visit, something that was seen or observed on a site visit. The 19-member body has to discuss that. All power for all committees and for all facets of grand jury life flows from the plenary. So those 19 panel members must authorize the committee's goals, the objectives of where the grand jury is going, any investigation. And so every individual panel member is called to rely upon their background, their research, to help, in that deliberative process. Was that the question, Ms. Brown?
Actually, I was thinking more in terms of bodies of expertise outside of the expertise provided by the panel.
Got it. I'm sorry about that. So there
No
are
worries.
Thanks. So I think Eric was spot on when he talked about there being some institutional memory. There are internal documents, templates, a manual, information that has been passed from one jury to the next, that helps in terms of where to look for certain things. Then, of course, the legal advisor to the grand jury, her name is Erin. Erin has been advising grand juries in our county for 20 or so years. And so she's a wealth of information as well. I'm here, and I worked for the court for about 15 years and can usually help navigate people to get where they're going. There is also a mechanism in the penal code for some outside specialized assistance that could be brought in special circumstances, but it's fairly narrow in scope. And so it would need to be something discussed with the legal advisor specific to an investigation.
Thank you, Brittany. So I think we're at time, and so I'm just gonna go over really quickly the sponsoring organizations. There's a lot of volunteer opportunities, and I definitely want to share that with the group here. And so one of the first ones is going to be CreaTV, and they are located in downtown San Jose. And they're a wonderful nonprofit organization. They have spaces open for various community activities. They have all sorts of recording and film equipment that is available to the community. And here are some of the events that they have coming up. And then you can see you can visit their website below there, opensanjose.org. And the next committee, or the next sponsor, is LEAD Filipino. I have been a proud member for a very long time, and they have quarterly membership meetings. You can visit leadfilipino.org to sign up for their newsletter to receive more. And they also have a conference coming up on March 28th. And then lastly, Dream Collaborative. And so we produce the podcast only in Santa Clara County, which explains how local government works. We talk about budgets, we talk about policy committees, boards and commissions. And so we do that for Santa Clara County as well as the city of San Jose. And you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on YouTube. And we also have a crash course free civics masterclass that would help you prepare if you wanted to join a board or commission on a city or county level. And so these are resources for you. And you can learn more at dreamingcollaborative.org. And so I think that kind of wraps up our panel. And we have the recruitment period here. Brittany, if you want to add any final words.
Thanks so much, Ellina. So yes, just to close out on the grand jury recruitment piece, again, and if you have questions about any of the wonderful sponsors that Ellina mentioned, any of those events or flyers, you want to see them again, please feel free to email at cgj at scscourt.org. But I just want to show this timeline because there was a question in the chat. Applications are open now for the 2026-2027 civil grand jury. They will be accepted through March 27 at 5 o'clock. You can fill those applications out online. You can also request a hard copy using that email address that I'll drop in the chat as well. There will be interviews and a background check that will culminate in a public ceremony on June 18, 2026, and then the term will begin July 1st. So again, if you have any questions or questions, I did put our website here. That's a QR code to the application itself. And I'll drop the email once more in the chat because I saw there are some questions we didn't get to in the chat today. But before I take all of Ellina's time, I want to thank you, Ellina, for a wonderful job moderating and for all you do to help engage our community. And then, of course, to our beautiful, lovely, and amazing panelists, Eric, Dinesh, and Allison. We appreciate not only your service to our community as a grand juror, but sharing your perspectives today.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us.